Welcome to the Friday Power Lunch, a weekly show amplifying the voices of the Virginia grassroots. Each week, we provide engaging conversations about politics, culture, and women making change. Produced by the unstoppable women of Network Nova, our motto is, when we vote, we win. The Friday Power Lunch is recorded before a live Zoom audience. Follow us on social media, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and show us some love and become a sponsor through Patreon. The Friday Power Lunch. Badass women getting things done.
I am Fennell Norton. It is May 3rd, and welcome to the Friday Power Lunch. Today's theme is location, 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 the geography of organizing. In order to fix a problem, you have to understand the problem. That is what Dr. John Finn says, who's the associate professor at Christopher Newport University. Dr. Finn's research brings together literature on racial capitalism, critical landscaping studies, and how it intersects with environmental justice. His work explores the ongoing economic, environmental, and health impacts of persistent racial segregation in the United States. It doesn't matter where you're calling in from today, you will be able to take this information and understand how it works in communities right around you. So we are delighted to have Dr. Finn today. We're also going to have Kim Sudderth. She was a community activist. She is a community activist. She's a former candidate for delegate in HD 92 in Norfolk, and she's also the first Black woman to serve as the vice chair of the Norfolk City Planning Commission. One day we're going to stop saying the first Black this and that, but not today. And then we have Ms. Margaret Morrison, a friend of this show who we love, a lifetime social justice advocate, and she's going to be here with us. So I am so excited, and I hope that you are too, for the amazing show we have for you today. Before we get started, though, let's do the rules of the road. We are a friendly and supportive community here. But as Catherine always says, if you get out of line, we're going to boot you right out. And we also have the after chat, and we want you to stick around. But today is going to be a tight 30 minutes. So hopefully you'll be able to stay, but we'll be hitting the road at 1:30 because we're off to the rural retreat. And always, we need you to be a supporter of the show. Be a Patreon. You can be a Patreon for as little as $5, $10, or $25 a month. It's value-packed, and it allows us to keep the lights on and to keep inspiring and bringing you the guests and building solidarity. That's what weekly meetings do. And of course, Patreons get benefits too. And our newest Patreon supporter is Kim Sheridan, who is also an amazing postcarder. So we hopefully will see Kim at the Network Nova. It's up to us in Northern Virginia. So the Postcard Palooza will be absolutely amazing. So we also have an audio version of the Friday Power Lunch. It's now available on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. That is so cool. So you can listen to the recording anytime and everywhere you get your podcasts. So remember our tagline, because this is so important, which will also be with the summit. No one is coming to save us. It is going to be absolutely up to us, each and every one of you. So before we get started with the show, we need to have some updates. So why don't we bring up LUISA for the Grassroots update. LUISA?
Well, hello, everyone. It is so great to see you this month. I am excited to talk just a little bit, as usual, about what is happening in Richmond. And then we will turn to the topic of today, really talking about, voter engagement and how we can get involved now in getting us ready for the elections that are really not very far away. So first, the biannual budget still being debated in Richmond. And as many of you probably know, Democrats refuse to accept many of Youngkin's amendments. And so we are still in that process. I'm going to be putting into the chat a call to action that we have asking the budget conferees to say no to Youngkin's $85 million budget amendment for his lab school program. As many of you know, that's another way to siphon off money from our public schools into privately owned institutions. So if you haven't already sent this letter to the conferees, please do so. While we are in the power lunch today, we would really appreciate your support. The more they hear from us, the more they feel like they have the backup, to be able to take these difficult votes and make those difficult decisions. I also want to give you an update on where we are with legislation. So as of now, the governor approved 17 bills that we prioritized as part of the Virginia Grassroots Coalition. Thank you to all of you who were working on those calls to action. Some of the bills that we did get passed are the electronic filing of campaign finance independent expenditure reports. It's just another way to, bring some light onto how money is being used by our campaigns. Protection for menstrual health data, which is a bill that Barbara Favola has carried for a couple of years. Increase in virtual meetings of local boards, which we've been working on pretty closely for the last few years, and excited to see that get past the finish line. The legal age for marriage established the legal age of marriage at 18 and eliminates the ability for a minor to be declared emancipated on the basis of their intent to marry. So that's really great in terms of a human rights win. And we also got the amendment to the shared solar program that has some additional provisions for how Dominion Energy runs that, which is really important. And then, of course, there are quite a few education bills as well. So I'm going to put a link to all of those in the chat if you would like to check out the legislation that has been approved, which will take effect July 1st of 2024. And then again, we have quite a lot of vetoed bills. And as a reminder, these are going to be bills that we'll want to make sure we're talking about on the campaign trail or on the doors and letting people know this is what your Republicans didn't support, right? So please check out that list. It's really, really helpful for talking points as we're talking to voters. So now, in terms of the elections, now is the time to be helping with voter education efforts. And I want to share a really cool one that is being organized by our friends out in Fauquier, Indivisible. They just sent a bunch of postcards out to folks, and they are asking them to register to vote. And they're going to do a follow-up door-to-door canvas to each of those folks who they sent a postcard to have conversations with them. And they would love some support out there. And they're going to have a Zoom on June 6th to get everybody excited and to tell you a little bit more about the folks that they're going to be talking to during that canvas. And then the canvas itself will be on Sunday, June 9th from 1 to 4 p.m., followed by a fun get together and social hour. So we really hope you'll consider getting involved and putting the link to that in the chat. So the RSVP is for the prep Zoom call on the 6th. So hopefully you can sign up for that and let them know that you're interested in learning more. I'm also putting in a link to phone banks with Center for Common Ground. So if at some point in this next week, we know it's going to be rainy, it's not going to be the great week to be out like it has this week. So it's a fantastic time to get on the phones and talk to folks both in our state and in other states about the elections that are happening this year. As we know, phone banking is really important. Some people, especially if it's going to rural areas, they don't really get those phone calls and they don't get those people knocking on their doors. So you can, depending upon those lists, have some really fantastic interactions. And hopefully this is also just a chance to remind folks, double check your voter registration. Don't ask, are you registered? Ask, have you checked your registration recently? Because we know in Virginia and across the country, people are getting dropped from the voter rolls and aren't aware of it. So this is a really important PSA, right, to be sharing with people. Anytime you get a chance to meet with them, reminding them, please check your voter registration. So the other thing I want to encourage you, if you aren't engaging with voters, is the other thing we should be doing at this time of the year is building our networks and strengthening our relationships. And we've got a great event coming up at the Cascades Library this Saturday, which is tomorrow. And it's for Northern Virginia organizers to get in the same room together to strategize and talk about possible ways to collaborate. So really excited that that is being co-led by a number of great grassroots organizations. And of course, we have this Sunday at 6 p.m. our monthly Virginia Grassroots Coalition call, where we will be going into more detail on how we're going to get involved in the elections this year, ways that you can be part of the effort. If you're not sure where things are and how to get involved, it's a great place to come. But if you have some really cool engagement opportunities, come as well, because we want to make sure everybody is hearing about the ways that they can become part of this all across the state. And it's great to see Carrie here, who is, representing us from the Virginia Beach, Hampton Roads area with COVA Coalition. They're doing some great work to do voter registration and education down there.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Louise. I was going to say, Canvas is going to look very, very different this year with Carrie. I can tell you that. With Carrie and Heidi, it's not going to look the same. So I'm really excited.
Yeah, I mean,
we are innovating. The grassroots are innovators, if nothing else. And we're actually really trying to find some great ways to do voter education and registration and engaging with voters. And so that's part of what the show's all about. So I'm excited to try some new things when getting, trying to get people registered. I mean, Laura Brill mentioned, I think it was last week at our voter registration show, how many people are getting purged from the rolls, how many people are need to get registered. So voter registration education is front and center, especially with COVA Coalition and lots of other groups, pretty much from now through the end of June. That's what we're focusing on.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And, it's a good way to start getting voters, to remember we've got some elections, but not just the presidential, right? Let's remind folks about the local races that are happening in our areas. Let's remind folks about the importance of Congress, right? Anytime someone asks me, well, Louisa, do you think, Biden is going to get reelected? My response is, let's figure out how we're going to get more Democrats elected to Congress. And let's figure out how we're going to get our new, a Democratic mayor in office, and how we're going to get more Democrats on the school board. If we're focused on those races, that's going to help the top of the ticket. I think that's going to be, our best solution this year. And let's make sure we don't, we remind people that there are really important local folks who are going to be on the ballot.
Yeah. Thank you, Louisa. So here we go. So Carrie, I know there's some stuff you want to talk about, and I know we have a video that we want to show too. So what do you want to say about the summit? We want to get this right.
Well, definitely we want to get it right, but I do think it's fantastic to just sort of follow up with what Louisa is saying. I mean, we're talking about equipping grassroots leaders and equipping volunteers. And I feel like going to the summit has been one of the best ways for me to feel like I'm learning new skills. I'm getting more resources. I'm meeting people that maybe I've heard on the Friday Power Lunch, I've never met. Meeting Susan Labandabar was like a highlight of the summit for me last year. And we actually sat on a bench and talked about some of the very things we're trying to implement in coastal Virginia. So that was worth the registration right there. I mean, I got to sit down with her and had her ear for 10 minutes. And she's such an amazing resource up in Boston, and I'm down in Hampton Roads. And so I think the Women's Summit is a fantastic opportunity to go, get charged up, get the resources, meet Louisa, meet all the folks at the Grassroots Coalition. And it's just a fantastic investment of your time and money to go up, stay in a hotel at Tyson's, did a little shopping. I mean, it was a fantastic experience for me.
So I would say I absolutely agree, because this election is like no other that we've had in our lifetimes, and we can do nothing but be prepared and be ready to take on whatever fight we have to take on. And that's what the summit gives us. And it also builds solidarity. That's what I love, is that you build community and solidarity, which is what keeps you going. And so I am going to do exactly what Louisa said. I'm not going to say, are you registered? I'm going to say, have you checked your registration? But we want to show a video of Catherine and what she thinks about the summit. So let it roll, Robin.
everybody look great in the room today. I am so excited to be here to talk about the Women's Summit. Because guess what, folks? There is no stopping us now. And I want to make sure I take a little moment as I'm on my way to the rural retreat and make sure we talk about the Women's Summit. So I hope you have your ticket. And if you don't, get your ticket today. What are you doing? Like, come on, what else is there to do on June 28th and 29th in Tysons, Virginia, but to come out and be in some badass company to get shit done? That's what we need to do. So we have a fabulous hotel. Friday night, you're going to check into that hotel or drive in for the day. And we have that's going to be the Postcard Palooza that night. And that is going to be fantastic because we have people coming from all over. The Markers for Democracy, the local groups hosting. It's going to be fantastic. And then on Saturday, we're going to get up and get out into the networking hall. And we have a great program designed with speakers like Rachel Bidikofer, Simon Rosenberg, Congressman Jennifer McClellan. Senator Hashmi is going to come talk about women's health care. Why not? That's what this is about. We also have Maggie O'Neill, fabulous artist. Vote for your daughter. We have vote up, vote down, vote every which way there is. Because when we vote, we win. That's one segment. Then we go to Democracy Looks Good on You, little Friday Power Lunch Live on the stage. And then it's up to us programming all day long. Tom Bonner is going to come talk about data. We love data. Rural Ground Game's going to be there. And they're not going to bring any chickens or lambs. So do not just get all freaked out. It's okay. But I did hear that the hotel does take dogs and animals. So maybe a chicken will be there. Then that night, the Badass Broadway Bash is going to happen. And that is going to be all about democracy is more than a word. Because friends, it is. Democracy is about doing what you want and being who you are. So I hope that you'll come out and be in community and make new friends. Because Red, Wine, and Blue is a big partner this year. They're coming in as a Blue Wave sponsor. So enjoy your day today. Think about the ticket. Tell your friends. And guess what? Sponsor us. If you're a Patreon, think about being a sponsor for this summit. We'd love to have that kind of support. We know that you care about us and you invest in us. And this event, this is our 8th year. We would love to have you on the program. Have fun today. I'll miss you, but I'll be doing some interesting stuff. We're working on the summit, and then we'll be back in touch. Oh, I think Robin's going to tell you about stuff, right, Robin? Robin, tell them about the art gallery and art stuff we're doing. What else are we doing? I don't know. It's going to be fun is all I'm going to tell you. No. I forgot. I'm channeling my badassery. Have fun, everybody.
Okay, that's pretty fabulous.
Great. It's so great. You know what? I do want to say one thing. I want to say one plug. She was talking about sponsorships, and I want to challenge everyone, especially if you're from an organization, you got a little bit of cash in the bank, maybe. Consider underwriting a volunteer from your club or group and pay for them to go to the summit. Share the wealth and sponsor someone and help them get to the summit.
Ditto. I'm going to go now and let you bring up Dr. Finn and do your thing.
Fantastic. Thank you. Great way to start the show. Dr. Finn, hello.
Hey there.
So we were talking about voter engagement. I'm so happy to have you, Dr. Johnny Finn from Christopher Newport University. Done a lot of work in human geography, mapping, thinking about the historical and geographical implications for some of our current situations, some of our current challenges in our communities. So Dr. Finn, I just want to bring you in and ask you about your research. So what was the question you were trying to answer when you embarked on this journey with your research?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks so much for the opportunity to be here to chat with you all. This sounds like a really exciting group and a really important time. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, but I also appreciate all the work that all y'all are doing. That's awesome. As an urban geographer, I really focus on how social and historical processes shape the cities, like the physical makeup and the demographic makeup of the cities that we live in the United States. And my project for the last several years has really been focused on the history of intentionally racist housing policies and practices from the past and how the legacy of those housing practices and housing policies shapes our present day urban landscape in terms of ongoing racial, economic, environmental, and health inequalities. So that's really kind of who I am as a research scholar, and also as a teacher. I teach classes on this at CNU, but really focusing on like where our urban inequality comes from. And that obviously leads to the next question that I think a lot of you are really focused on is, well, what do we do about it? So yeah.
Right. So I think one of the most important things that I've learned from you is visualizing these mappings. So I'm going to ask Robin to bring up that first map that where you have charted some of the outcomes of the discriminatory housing policies in Hampton Roads, specifically in portions of Norfolk and Newport News. So Robin, I think you've got that slide number 1 for us. So when you were taking a look at the data and you formulated these maps, was there anything that kind of surprised you when you were looking at that map?
Yeah, and so when the map comes up, what I try to do with this whole series of maps that I built with a colleague of mine is to look at the 1930s era redlining map. And this is a map that there's hundreds of them from cities around the country that show in kind of color-coded green and blue neighborhoods that are worthy of housing assistance during the Great Depression, and then red neighborhoods that were overwhelmingly Black neighborhoods that were cut off from housing assistance in the context of the Great Depression. And what I wanted to show, and what I think when people engage with and see these maps, what we are most surprised to see is that the red lines from the 1930s that were demarcated as Black neighborhoods that were not worthy of, and it was one previous map, I think.
The very first map, right?
Is what surprises people? Go back one more, I think. Still, yeah. That's the one. And what you're seeing here is you're seeing the outlines of the redlined outlined areas are we superimpose the red lines of the 1930s era redlining map of Greater Hampton Roads onto a map of 2020 census data by race. And what you can see, and I think what's most surprising to people, and maybe it shouldn't be if you pay attention to kind of our urban history, what you can see is that the lines that were demarcated in the 1930s are still overwhelmingly the lines of racial segregation in the present day. In fact, we did some analyses and we were able to show that inside of the areas that were redlined almost 100 years ago, today those areas are still close, on average, 70% African American. And compared to areas that were green and blue on the map, nearly a century ago, those areas are on average today 70% white. So what we can really see, the conclusion to take from this is that all of the kind of a whole constellation of public policy and private discriminatory actions over the last century has really made very stable these lines of racial inequality in our cities.
And now I'm thinking, just kind of taking into the voter education, not having that data right now, but the registration and voter education we're doing right now. I mean, I would imagine that some of the neighborhoods that are outlined on your map as far as predominantly African American and then also predominantly low income because of the redlining policies from the past are probably some of the places where we're going to need to engage with voters to get them re-registered, because from what I understand, a lot of the purge voter rolls were coming from some of these very areas. I thought it was also talking about intersectionality with just voting rights, but also the intersectionality of environmental justice. So I wanted to bring up another map, and all of these maps can be found on your website, which is Living Together, Living Apart.
That's right.
So these maps, you can scroll through the maps for yourselves and you want to take a look at these maps later. So tell us about this one. This map. Go ahead.
Yeah, so this map is a map. It's the same base map and the same kind of outline of those redlined areas from the 1930s. But what you're seeing in color in the foreground is the heat map, the summertime average temperature at the neighborhood scale. And what you could see is that neighborhoods that were redlined, again, many, many decades ago, those neighborhoods in Hampton Roads, when we ran this analysis, those neighborhoods are on average 5.5 degrees hotter on a summer afternoon compared to neighborhoods that escaped redlining. And the reason for this is actually really simple. Redlined neighborhoods for decades now, for more than a century, have been the sites of high levels of disinvestment, whereas neighborhoods that were marked in green and green and blue on these original redlining maps that are primarily white neighborhoods and middle and upper income neighborhoods have been the sites of extensive public and private investment over the same period. And so whereas you have high levels of pavement and exposed land with very little tree canopy in disinvested areas, you have lots of trees and green spaces in the more heavily invested areas. And this directly leads to these kinds of environmental outcomes where, in the context of climate change, in the context of intensifying heat waves and rising baseline temperatures, neighborhoods that are highly segregated with higher poverty rates and more likely to be ethnic and racial minorities, those are precisely the same neighborhoods that are overexposed to all kinds of environmental hazards, including, as this map shows, heat.
So I know that in the present day, there have been some projects. I know that Delegate Glass in Norfolk was doing some soil sponge projects where she was encouraging people to actually plant more trees in this area. A lot of folks are trying to understand this history. Many of us had heard of redlining before, but to actually see how it intersects with public health, indicators of public health, environmentalism, that's all something that I think I am trying to understand in a more holistic way. So I know that this was not just an academic exercise for you, right? You're trying to engage people with this data.
Yeah, so as an academic, kind of the bread and butter of the work that I do is, writing esoteric academic journal articles and publishing them in journals that have paywalls that nobody can really access. And I get frustrated with that. I've become very frustrated with that kind of model. And so in the last several years, I've been much more engaged in what we call public geography, is trying to figure out ways to take the research that I'm doing, the academic, the theoretically and methodologically grounded research that I'm doing, but take it and translate it into mediums and into language that are accessible to broader publics. Because I think that this work is like when you see a map like this, that the history of racial segregation and the patterns that has created are the very same patterns of overexposure to heat. I think that has really broad implications for where we go as a society, for what kind of policies we put into place, what kinds of issues we organize around. And so I've been dedicated for the last several years, really starting actually with the onset of the pandemic. I've been really kind of dedicated to much more broad public engagement in this work.
So I wanted to bring up that slide of the museum display, the museum exhibit, because this is one of the ways that you were trying to get people to actually engage with the data. So can you explain what the museum exhibit was all about and where it's going to go from here?
Yeah, sure. So I had the opportunity starting in 2020 to work with the curator and the director of the Virginia Museum for Contemporary Art to try to, it's in Virginia Beach, it's the Virginia MoCA, to translate this work into an exhibition that ultimately ran in late 2022 through early 2023 in a gallery in the Virginia Museum of Contemporary Art. And this exhibition featured some of the maps that you just saw and many more maps. And it also featured a lot of photographs from our research participants, photographs that our participants took and then told us about. And basically, we invited participants to take pictures of places that were meaningful to them and their lives. And then we developed the film, we interviewed them about the images, and we really tried to build a very kind of interactive exhibition that people could come in and they could, on the left here, you can see they could read about a little bit of the history, but then they could see the impacts of the history on the scale of the city through the maps that we produced. And then on the impacts on the scale of the individual person through the photographs and the captions and excerpts of interviews that were associated with those photographs. And of course, on the floor, you can see we produced a 750 square foot map of the entire Hampton Roads region that's large enough and high resolution enough that you can see individual houses. And so people were able to come into this gallery to look on the floor, to literally find their place on the floor of the map. And what we really hoped is by doing that, find their place in the story that we're trying to tell with the exhibition, and also see that they're implicated not only in the history, but also in this question of where do we go from here.
Right. I want to bring in Kim Sudderth, the next guest on this, because Kim, I'm really interested. She is an organizer. Again, just for review here, we're talking with Dr. Johnny Finn from Christopher Newport University, who's done some amazing research and collection of data and mapping on the history of racial injustice policies and the supported policies and legal policies and things that came out of that have been reinforcing what he calls the landscapes of inequality for generations in Hampton Roads and the impact of that. Kim Sudderth, a really good friend and great organizer. She actually lives in one of the neighborhoods and has done some work in one of the neighborhoods that you mapped out. Kim Sudderth, welcome to the Friday Power Lunch. Thanks for being here.
Oh, of course. I'm honored to be here, and thank you, everyone. And also thank you to Dr. Finn. I don't think I've had an opportunity to thank you personally, but I did happen to go to the exhibit at the MoCA with the redlining exhibit. I came because the keynote speaker is a researcher as well, Dr. Cassandra Newby-Alexander. Yep. And so I went there and was able to physically stand on the map and see where my community had been previously redlined. But the reason I also want to thank you, Dr. Finn, is that when my community was being excluded from plans by the Army Corps of Engineers for a seawall, I referenced the previous redlining, and I was most familiar with it because of your exhibit. So thank you very much for that. The work that you do, it definitely has affected both my organizing and where I actually live today. Excellent. So thank you again.
So that's a fantastic example of sort of how Dr. Finn's research has actually had an impact on local activists. It's really happening. I just want to ask real quick before Kim goes, before we let Dr. Finn go, Dr. Finn, what do you want activists, not just like Kim, activists like me, activists who are on this call, because we have a lot of them here, what would you like us to do with this kind of data? What would you like us to do with this? What's the now what piece? Yeah,
that's a great question. It's one that I've been reflecting on for the last couple of days in preparation for today. And I think the one thing I'll say from my perspective is, like, from an academic perspective, we can think up policies all day long that would help ameliorate some of these past harms. We could build more affordable housing. We could figure out plans for reparations. We could, create different kind of tax breaks and funding initiatives and incentives. But none of that is worth the paper that it's written on if people in neighborhoods and communities won't allow those policies to go into effect. And so I think I'll give a couple of examples of successful campaigns that have actually translated into actual change. In the summer of 2021, a new law in Virginia went into effect to make illegal discrimination based on source of income. What that means is the legal way of saying landlords can no longer discriminate against tenants who use Section 8 housing funds to help pay the rent. And that's a big deal. It makes it illegal to discriminate based on Section 8 voucher usage. And it also makes it illegal to jack up the rent when you know that your tenant is paying with Section 8 or with a portion of the rent with Section 8 vouchers. Minneapolis has gotten rid of single-family exclusionary zoning. This is something that a lot of places, because of NIMBYism, it is not on the table as a possibility, but Minneapolis went ahead and said, we're going to get rid of exclusionary single-family zoning. And this only happened a couple of years ago, so it's not clear yet the impact it has been. But people in places around the country are organizing for fairer and more affordable housing. But I think the real challenge is that it all sounds good, but the rubber meets the road when the neighborhoods and communities start to organize a backlash against it. And so I think that that's how I think about a lot of this, is the challenge of not just dreaming up policies, but how to engage communities to allow those policies to go into effect.
Right. So without truly engaging in this, people go back to their corners.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I think that's hopefully with the exhibition, hopefully we built the exhibition intentionally to try to show people, physically actually place them on the map and show them that they're implicated in this story. They're implicated in the history, and they're implicated wherever you live, wherever you're from, you're implicated in where we go from here. And not doing something or not allowing an affordable housing or mixed medium density housing to be built adjacent to your community. Not doing that is actually doing something. It's going against the cause of fair and more affordable housing, for example.
Well, thank you for your work. We appreciate it so much. And thanks for being here today. You're going to stay for the after chat for a little bit with us?
I'm not going anywhere.
Fantastic. Okay, and make sure that we get that that link in the chat, that website where the maps are. So Kim, back to you. This can be very validating for some of the communities that you work with, right?
Absolutely. As I said in the previous example, I literally stood on a representation of the map that showed my neighborhood as being redlined, which we all know includes, reducing the ability to refinance your home if you wanted to pay for college or to get a new roof, to purchase a home in that neighborhood. And so I love the neighborhood that I live in. I wouldn't change it for the world. Shout out to Berkeley on the south side of Norfolk. And what was disheartening is that when we were advocating for a seawall, the Army Corps of Engineers used the benefit cost analysis and said, well, the wall would cost more than the properties that it would be protecting. And I think if you're a bean counter, that means something. But see, people live here. And so although we had the redlining as context for how we ended up living in a community that the property values were, artificially lowered and stayed that way for almost 100 years. But of course, we don't want to continue with that racist system. Of course, we don't want to continue to hurt the people that live there, right? Of course not. And so we're very, very fortunate that we were able to activate essentially our congressional, congressional, easy for me to say, congressional group of folks like Congressman Bobby Scott and Senators Tim Kaine and Mark Warner. And that was last year. I just checked in with someone, and they're still working very hard to make sure that we get the protection that we deserve. So it's research like from Dr. Finn that can give us the background and that context to the issues that we're fighting against, or rather the things that we'd like to have, we advocate for on the ground.
Someone just mentioned circular thinking, because you're basing. Yeah, and it's just so perfect because you're basing it on bad data from the very beginning. The data was manipulated back then. So we're just going to continue to use the manipulated data from here to eternity because no one's going to challenge it. And I think as activists and allies, perhaps that could be a role for us to play, to keep pointing that out.
Well, I think you're absolutely right, that everyone has their role. I will say that for myself, I'm very fortunate to be involved in the work. And I say the work as capital T, capital W, the work TM, because all of us have a part in it. We have our researchers like Dr. Finn. We have our decision makers like Delegate Jackie Glass. We have activists who are on the ground doing the work and know the people, if not themselves, who are directly impacted by specific social issues. And then you have organizers who are looking big picture, 30,000 feet, creating that long-term strategy that includes everyone, and ensuring that everyone's at the table and that we all get a say. And speaking of sayings, I say all the time, no decisions about me without me. So make sure that you're very inclusive, isn't just inviting us to the table, but also playing an active role in the decision making.
Is there a way that activists and organizers on this call could do a better job of that, Kim?
Well, yes, that is the answer. Yes, there's always a way to get better. But I would say reach out to your networks. I believe that everyone knows a guy that knows a guy. And I'm sorry to genderize that, but but everyone knows someone who can connect them with the folks that they need to be in front of. So, and Carrie, you and I were talking yesterday, just kind of prepping for today, and we talked about, activists versus organizers versus decision makers. And I think I want to take the verses out and really that circular thinking that we are all connected, and that many of the issues that you're working with or working for are somehow intersecting with the issues that I might be advocating for or working with. Right. And so I would say, in general terms, just always be recruiting people, even if just to invite them to one meeting and just say, no obligation. I just want to invite you to see this group or talk to these folks that I'm working with. And maybe there's some synergy, maybe not, but I would say I bet that more likely than not, we're all connected and have some way to support each other.
You have a really good reputation in Hampton Roads as being a coalition builder with diverse communities. I mean, you have done it. We've seen it in action. So I think that's got to be just you invite, genuinely invite. Yes. And try to find the commonalities, right?
Find the commonalities, but most importantly, build relationships. Carrie, you and I think that we were introduced to each other within the work, but we also took the time and were really intentional about getting to know each other really well. So we're at this position. I know that I can call my friend Carrie and I know that she's going to, again, perform as the badass that she is. And I hope, and I hear you when you say I have a good reputation. I'm glad to hear it.
Well, it got you on City Planning Commission, which I think is fantastic. And then it got you as vice chair. So I always love it when folks like you, the organizers, the organizing happens in between elections. It's long-term, it's a relationship. And here we have a community organizer who is now in a power position. The Planning Commission is an important role in Norfolk. So I'm tickled to death. It's so validating to see you at the meetings because you're the one who does your homework. That you could hear a pin drop sometimes when Kim asks a question on Planning Commission, trust me, and no one knows the answers. That she did her homework before she got there because she's been at it so long. And it's so validating to have you in that power. I'm so proud to see you up in that powerful position of the Planning Commission to actually maybe be able to affect change in these very issues that Dr. Finn and you are working so hard to change.
I appreciate that, Carrie, and I'm humbled. I was invited because I make a lot of noise, and I'm very honored to be in that position. But I can also tell you that the lens that I bring, that activist organizer lens that I bring to this commission, as an example, we were looking at bus routes. Did we want fewer bus routes so that there were shorter wait times in between stops, or did we want more, which means more people would be able to access it? And we had this wonderful online tool and everyone was really excited. And so my question was, well, where are the printouts for the folks that may not have access to a website or have the technical savvy to find it? And no one had suggested that. And so they worked really hard, the city folks, and were able to print them out and place them at the bus stops. So here's a novel idea. People who actually use the bus could actually give their input on the bus routes. And so I love that I had the opportunity to serve in that way. And I look forward to continuing in that capacity.
Great. Awesome. Well, we're bringing Fanal in because Fanal and I had a conversation about context, about how just what you're saying, it's the folks in the community that provide the context for the conversations, like don't make decisions about me without me. And so I wanted to bring Fanal in the conversation.
Yeah, Kim, this has been really awesome. And it's been awesome listening to Dr. Finn too. When I think about this, I think about, oh, geez, what about communities who don't have representation? They might not have gotten a delegate or a senator or a Kim. And so how do we take this information and expand it so that we're all working together? And I think the other thing that I think about is when we are canvassing neighborhoods, and Carrie and I were having this conversation, there might be something that the candidate wants to talk about, but you have to bring it local to what's happening in that community. So don't go and talk to me about rails to trails when I don't have sidewalks and we don't have any trees and we don't have, don't talk to me about you put a dog park in when we don't have a decent road to drive down to get into my home. That's what you should be.
Grocery store. We don't have a grocery store.
Or a grocery store. So I think these are really important conversations to have. And I was also recently, I was reading about, we said this is everywhere. I was reading about Baltimore, about Maryland. And just remember that they had that highway to nowhere that has been there since the 70s that divides Baltimore, so that they had thriving neighborhoods that no longer exist because of that highway. And they're just now starting. And then remember that President Obama gave $900 million to Baltimore. And Governor Hogan at the time took that $736 million, sent the rest of it back and put it in predominantly white neighborhoods. So I think that we see this stuff happening all over the country, but it takes grassroots efforts and knowledge like yours and Dr. Finn's to bring it to light and get people engaged all around it.
Thank you. And I want to say one thing, and I don't want to take up too much time, but for that very reason, I started a organizer academy. It's called GROW, Grassroots Organizers. And I'll just be honest with y'all, I'm a bit of an organizer nerd, a nerd and an organizer snob. And so I figured if I wanted more organizers, more activists, more of the folks who are on the ground doing the work, I just decided to kind of open source the information that I have, whether it's academic or experiential. What I know, I just try to spread it as much as possible. My dream is that there is a trained organizer in every community in the Commonwealth of Virginia. I'm saying it live for the first time, so thank you. But the point is that if you break your leg, you might say, "Where's the doctor?" Or if you get into some legal trouble, you might say, "Where's a lawyer?" But what I'm hoping for, if there's an injustice, that someone says, "Somebody go call the organizer." So that's my dream, and it sounds like I'm among great organizer company, and I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
And as we always say, it's up to us, Kim. No one is coming to save us. It is up to us. Thanks for being here, Kim. Thank you. Hope you're going to stay for that after chat. Fantastic.
Thank you, Carrie. So for those of us, thank you. For those of us who are just joining us, we just had Kim Sudderth, who is the vice chair in Chesapeake and Norfolk, in South Norfolk, and Dr. Finn, associate professor at Christopher Newport College. But now we're going to round out this discussion with Miss Margaret, who is a friend, a beloved friend of the show. And a lifetime social justice advocate. And Miss Margaret, we've been talking about this location. I would love to hear your thoughts on what you've just heard and how you think about it from before, with all the work that you've done and what you see now.
Yes, thank you for having me once again on the program. But because when I come, I learn so much. And I'm so appreciative of what Dr. Finn has done and what Mrs. Sudderth is continuing to do, both of you, because the more we educate the public, the better off we are in understanding how we got how we became what we are today. So thanks so much. when I first read the information, location, I like to play with words. And so for me, I thought, well, what does that mean? And I related it to the political situation of today, because the location of where you are dictates what is happening in your communities, whether it's abortion rights or gun advocacy or women's issues. You can depend, almost like the map that Dr. Fan showed, you can tell where things are going amiss by the pros and the cons, the negative reactions or the positive reactions. And so that was the first thing I thought about. Then I looked up where Dr. Fan is a professor, only to find out that eminent domain, that's why you got where you are. Well, not you, obviously, personally, but that land was Black land owned. And how was it taken? By eminent domain, nothing else but that. And so then that led me to more think about the geography. That was the other part of the question of the statement that Nova listed. And for me, the location meant something altogether different. The geography makes a difference in the United States. Ask the indigenous people here. The land was stolen from them. Had nothing to do with the rights or whatever purchased. It was absolutely stolen. Fennell mentioned the situation in Baltimore, where the money was given to white-owned, most of the money was given to white-owned people. So don't start me with a history lesson, because each little tidbit of information draws me back to an earlier time in our history. And if we don't understand the earliest time in our history, how we got to where we are today, there's nothing we can do to overcome and to make advances. And so, but Neil, I'm not sure that's the question you asked me, but those are the terms that came out when I read location, and I translated that to land, and I translated the land to the geography, and I translated all of that to where we are today in our current situation. So,
well, that's because we're supposed to learn from you. So I think that it fits in perfectly, because when we had a conversation about this, you said, well, I can tell you about location. I can sum it up in 5 minutes for you. You did say that. And so,
absolutely.
And so you just did. And we're so grateful to have your perspective and how you think about this. And I was glad to be able to bring in about Maryland, because it's important. And we know the most important thing about real estate is location. I know you're going to be with us in the after chat, but what I also wanted to ask you about is, there is so much going on around location. I wanted you to sort of talk to folks about how you take your history lessons and how you turn to optimism for where we are today.
Well, actually, at my age, at 88, I can say I am history in a real sense. And so the issues we talked about today, we spoke about the redlining, the eminent domain, all of these. I have lived through that. When my husband and I first tried to purchase a home in Chicago, there were areas I had not heard of the term redlining at that point. We were just looking for a home in a nice neighborhood. We were able to afford it. Mm-hmm. It's not prepared for the reaction of white people in those areas. They actually would come to the door, look from their screens to see who are these Black people traveling in our area. So I'm familiar with redlining, and it's not just in Chicago. I moved to Montgomery County, Maryland in 1973, and I recall specifically riding with a real estate dealer. My husband and I were both in the car, and we I believe the area was Bethesda, but I didn't know enough about Montgomery County to be specific about that. But the real estate person in front of the house that with the for sale sign, as my driver drove up, just shook his head. Mm-hmm. Now I knew what that meant, but I also knew that I didn't want to live in whatever that neighborhood was. Mm-hmm. And so these things are personal. It took me more years to determine how it became what it is. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning from Dr. Finn. I'm still learning from Kim, from the other people you've had on the program. I'm in the process of reading this book. I'm not sure whether any of you have read it. It's called The Color of Law by Richard Rothstein, to actually assist me more in understanding how we got to where we are. But yeah, I'm still positive. You know why I'm positive? Because the opposite is just not a realistic way to live a life. Mm-hmm. You need to move forward. People have asked me, well, why do I continue to talk about voting? Why do I do this? But you know what? I do it because I'm following the trail of my ancestors. You know why I do it? Because I know that there is something better than we can do. You know why I do it? Because we say we're that shining place on the hill and that, you know, the greatest democracy that the world, the entire universe has ever known. And you know that's a lot of malarkey, but it's not that we can't be that. And so that's why I'm striving. We could be that. We could be better than what we are. That's why I marched with Dr. Martin Luther King and with John Lewis, where I was at Montgomery in 1965, and realizing that's 100 years since the Civil War ended, 1865 and 1965. And I can still say in 2024, what are we doing? We're still marching there, but I still have hope. Because as I say, without hope, what else is there? So
what else is there?
But that's why I like this group. Political activists, all of you, every single one of you, not just on today's program, but week after week and year after year, I see you pushing that, what did Dr. Theodore Parker said, pushing the arc forward. The arc of moral justice bends. But you know what? It doesn't bend by itself. It bends because people are behind it, pushing it forward. And sometimes it goes back, as it did with all the progress we made after the Civil Rights, Voting Rights Act. When I think about that act, that was in 1965. My dad was 65 years old that same year. And it was the first time he had ever had a chance to vote in his entire lifetime. See, that's ridiculous. And yet it's true, and we all know that. And so why are we continuing to fight? Not just me, but all of you, because we know we can do better.
And
we can do better.
We can do better.
Right. But now you asked me once, well, what would I tell young people?
Ms. Margaret.
I tell people the same thing I tell old people. Go out there and vote. Just do it. Vote.
Well, Ms. Margaret, you're going to stay with us in the after chat because you must. And so we're going to round out this conversation and say thank you, and that we'll see you in the after chat. For those of you just joining, it's Ms. Margaret Morrison, who is a lifetime advocate and who you will also see on Resisterhood. So Carrie, we got just a few minutes left to sort of round out the show and finish off. So what do you?
Yeah, we're gonna recap. I think it's fantastic to get Ms. Margaret and Kim's reaction to some of that research that Dr. Finn had done, because in our previous discussion, he had mentioned that the differences between some of the audiences and where he discusses this data is marked, the difference, because in a lot of African-American communities, it's very validating. There's a reason. They know. They can't maybe put their finger on it. They know in their heart. It's their shared experiences, their lived experiences, why neighborhoods are like this. But they don't have the data necessarily. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But just like what Miss Margaret said, I mean, she knows it. She knows we can do better. And why? Because we don't always understand that. And sometimes that NIMBYism or the bootstrap mentality that comes out of some other audiences that we may discuss this data in. I mean, there's no such thing as bootstraps. There are people who benefited from these policies, and there are people who were victims of these policies. There's a lot in between there. And so, yes, we can do better. And I always I could sit at the feet of Miss Margaret for hours. And I'm glad she'll be in the after chat.
We all can, and she will be in the after chat. And what I will say is, Miss Margaret makes the hair on my neck stand up, because I just feel so privileged that we all get to hear her and understand and learn from her experiences. She is the one who's pushing us forward. And so I love that. I just want to say that, and Miss Margaret has told us, no one's coming to save us. And so we have to save ourselves. It is up to us. And she's talking about advocacy and voting and getting out there and not giving up. And so we're going to be talking next week about Project 2025 with Andrea Watkins. And I talked to you about that a little earlier. And what did you tell me you were going to do?
I am telling every single friend of mine, please make yourself aware of Project 2025. This is serious. I want to get a t-shirt that says, ask me about Project 2025. Maybe actually don't, right? Because it's kind of scary, but it's something we cannot avoid. We need to learn about it. So I am so thrilled. I am so thrilled that Andrea Watkins is going to be here next week to educate us all. You need to school yourself on Project 2025. Is the real deal. So all of you please tune in next week. And don't forget that we're going to be on the Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Tell your friends if they miss next week, they can catch it on the podcast. It's extremely important that every activist worth her weight is educated about Project 2025. It's the real deal, and we need to know more about it. So
we absolutely do. And so, guys, that's our show. We will see you next week, but let's move right on into the after chat.
And then we'll roll the credits.
Roll.